Good morning. Please join us as we sing together to get started.
Good morning, everyone. Please be seated. Welcome, everyone, here to First Unitarian Church. We are a multi-generational community that strives to nurture the individual spirit and together build a beloved community. Welcome all gathered here. Welcome those joining us via live stream this morning. Our social hour today will be in our Buchanan building in that direction, and it will include a very special reception for Signe Lusk, who's retiring after 40 years as our accompanist here at First Unitarian. So join after the service for special food and refreshments. As we celebrate Signe. And a reminder that next Sunday we will be joining fellow Unitarian Universalists from around the country for worship at the UU General Assembly. It's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania this year. That means we won't have an in-person service here next Sunday. Now, because of the time difference, that service will actually be at 8 a.m. our time, but you can watch it later. I know that's pretty early. Look for links in our e-news this week for how to connect with that, but that will be our service next Sunday. And we will be back here for in-person services on July the 2nd. Once again, welcome everyone. And as we gather today, let's take some time and greet one another now. Reverend Alison will light the chalice here on our chancel this morning. If you have a candle or chalice at home, I invite you to light it now.
We are
Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice in faith, in hope, and in love.
Our call to worship. The words are by Tupac Shakur, the poem, "The Rose That Grew from Concrete." Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else ever cared. Will you rise in body or spirit and let us join together in singing, "O Liberating Rose"? A Litany for Survival, adapted by Audre Lorde. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. Let us join in our doxology.
Each week we take an offering to support the ministry of this congregation, and part of this practice is to share our offering each week and month with organizations that are in concert with our church mission. For this month of June, we're sharing our plate with Friends of Noise, which supports creative youth in Portland through all ages concerts, workshops, and experience navigating the music scene. Friends of Noise is building on the values of collectivism and restorative justice. They seek to transform the culture of BIPOC and LGBTQ+ youth access to the music industry. If you'd like to give electronic to our offering today, you can find a QR code on the screen shortly, or if you're here in person, there should be a yellow slip in the chairs around you for that QR code. And if you're here in person and want to give cash or check, ushers will be coming by shortly. Thank you for your generosity today and always that supports the mission of this congregation. We take time each Sunday in our service to name the concerns of our community life together. A reminder, you're always invited to light a candle of intention in one of our galleries. You can also write down a prayer request that will be held by our ministers and our lay ministers. And if you're online, you can send a prayer request to prayer@firstunitarianportland.org. Our flowers today are given in memory of Jim Kimball, husband of Linda Craig. Jim died on June 21st, 2007. He was a former member of our church and a founding member of the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Washington County. Jim grew up in the Dalles and loved the yellow flowers of spring in the Columbia Gorge. Member Kirsten Lee asked for prayers for her husband, Joseph Sawicki. Joseph had a terrible bike accident which resulted in a traumatic brain injury on June 10th. He is being cared for in the trauma ICU at OHSU, and Kirsten asked for prayers for a full recovery of his gorgeous brain, that they're needed and most welcome. We hold them especially today. And a joy. Avery Giroux and Samson Harmon were married yesterday in a ceremony at the Laurelhurst Club here in Portland. They will henceforth be known as Avery and Samson Harmon. We celebrate with them on their wedding this weekend. Today is Father's Day, and we celebrate fathers and we celebrate fatherhood. We celebrate all who parent, no matter their gender identity today. With this day can come joy and gratitude, and we know too that with this day can come sorrow and hurt and a wide range of emotions. In marking this day, may we make a space here to hold the fullness and the complexity of Father's Day as we honor fathers now. Tomorrow is Juneteenth, as we mark the day when African Americans learned after the Civil War that they were no longer slaves. In acknowledging this day, we also acknowledge all that legacy of slavery and how it is still with us, and how the reckoning of that legacy continues on. Finally, this coming week, we will mark the summer solstice, the longest day and the shortest night of the year. May it be a time to celebrate our Mother Earth and offer a prayer that our Mother Earth might be sustained. Will you join me now in prayer? Spirit of life and of love, God of many names and no name at all, hear our prayers. These we name in this gathering, those we hold in our hearts, in this community we call beloved. We come with much on our hearts and on our minds at this time. We are in spirit. Help us to be present with all the complexities of life. Help us to make a space for what has been. Help us to make a space to hold what might be. Help us, Spirit, as we begin right now in this present moment and all that it offers. Let us give thanks in this moment for right now. We lift our voices here together in hope for change that might be possible, in hopes that this may be a time of turning. Call us to see ourselves, each and every one of us, to be part of some greater turning. Grant us courage, grant us hope. Help us to see beyond our individual selves as part of some larger whole. And through it all, no matter what, Spirit, ground us in love. Amen. Let's take a few moments now and be together in silence. Let's remain seated as we sing together, "Carry Me." Our reading today comes from Joy Harjo. Perhaps the world ends here. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together once again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth at this table and have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite.
I just want to take a moment to thank the pickup choir. We are so blessed that throughout the summer, people show up and join the choir, and so maybe some of you have been thinking about that. You might not realize it's a pickup choir because they're so amazing, but it's a great time to be part of our music program. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah. We met our new pediatrician this week, and naturally she interviewed us about our family's medical history since we just moved here this year. When it came time to talk about my father, I mentioned that he had his first heart attack at the young age of 35, and his next heart attack 10 years later, and ultimately he passed away from heart failure at 56. But then, my son, my 5th grader, surprised me. He said, "Don't forget to tell the doctor about the part where he pretends to be sick so that he can get your mother to come back to him." You see, my parents' unlikely meeting happened when my mother was his nurse on a home care assignment as he recuperated from open heart surgery after that first very serious heart attack. On one hand, the episode solidified that my father wouldn't live to an old age and that his health would always be something he would have to contend with. On the other hand, this trial led to his meeting the love of his life. So knowing that time was of the essence, he called the home care agency, pretended to be sick again, and when my mother showed up at the door, he asked, would she like to go out on a date? Right then and there. She said yes, and aiming to sweep her off her feet, he took her to lunch at the Waldorf Astoria. And my mother always delights in telling the part that she was dressed for work in her nurse's uniform. It turns out that this ability to know your family's story or your chosen family's story is one of the single most important factors for resilience. Now, it's not about holding on to a positive story, it's about knowing these stories of your family of origin, of the families you've created, and the stories of the communities to which you feel you belong. Knowing our wider collective history and stories, including the most difficult parts in developmentally appropriate ways, is also a source of resilience and hope. And that's one reason why book banning is such a detriment to the well-being of our education system, and more specifically, the mental health of our children, who are the adults of the future. Understanding the history of race in America is to come face to face with deplorable acts of inhumanity, but it is also the history of expanding justice, unfolding liberation, and the widening circle of scientists, artists, and leaders that have shaped and are shaping our culture and society. These personal and collective stories help weave the narrative that we hold when facing adversity, uncertainty, and change. They provide the story, which is a psychological and spiritual tool that either buoys us up when the waters of life swirl and rise around us, or leave us gasping for air. During the 2 years leading up to the tragedy of 9/11, Dr. Marshall Duke and Dr. Robin FATIH at Emory University researched the impact that knowing the stories of our families have on resilience. Of course, they had no idea that 9/11 would happen, but when they did, it provided them with another opportunity to go back and learn how what they call the do you know scale impacted the ability of children to cope. The do you know scale involves 20 questions. FATIH and Duke asked children these questions, and they also taped several dinner table conversations as a part of their research to listen for the stories that were told. Question number 5 on their scale is, do you know where some of your grandparents met? That's the story my son wanted to share with his new doc. Number 13 is, do you know some of the lessons that your parents learned from good or bad experiences? Number 20 is very interesting. Do you know about a relative whose face froze in a grumpy position because they did not smile enough? 15% of the children responded, yes, they know that story. That's because family stories aren't always true. Sometimes they're told in ways to teach a lesson or to help with a psychological or spiritual hurt. And as such, they may be modified as needed. And sometimes that becomes part of the story. If, let's say, your father and, let's say, his sibling don't tell the story the same way, that becomes part of the story. Knowing the stories is one piece that offers resilience in a time of trial, and the shape that the narrative takes is another piece that can make a difference. It turns out that families and groups, we're a group, often have a way of telling an overarching, unifying narrative that takes on one of 3 forms. One, some of you may recognize yourselves or people that have influenced you in this. It's called the ascending narrative. Son, when we came to this country, we had nothing. Our family worked, we opened a store, your grandfather went to high school, your father went to college, and now you, or there's the descending narrative. Sweetheart, we used to have it all, and we lost everything. And the third one is the oscillating narrative. Dear so-and-so, let me tell you, we have had ups and downs in our family. We came to this country to escape war. We built a family business. Your grandfather was a pillar of the community. Your mother served our community on the Board of Education. But we've had setbacks. Your uncle was arrested, our house burned down, your father lost a job, but no matter what happened, we always stuck together as a family. So I invite you to guess which kind of narrative serves as the healthiest. Yes, it is the third, that oscillating narrative. Dr. Duke reports that children and adults that have the most self-confidence have what he calls a strong intergenerational self and a sense of being part of a larger family. This language catches my attention because when people join our congregation, they often share that they want to feel a connection to something larger than themselves. They may use different words for that: God, the cosmos, the natural world, the beloved community, the wider human family, our spiritual village, and so on. To be human is to crave relationships and belonging. And when we are rooted in those relationships, they provide us with stories that ground us. And when that is the case, we are more able to rise up and outward to meet the day before us. Just yesterday, I had the chance to meet with one of the groups that is a part of this fellowship, of this congregation, the Alliance, and I call them the backbone of our church. At first, they were the Ladies' Sewing Circle, and that was a group of women, as many of you may recall, who dared to imagine that in 1865, Portland would be ready for liberal religion. And they met and sewed together to raise money and raise ideas that would seed this community. They were able to buy our first communion set, and then they set their eyes on a building. Now, this weekend, the Sewing Circle, which then became the Women's Alliance and is now the Alliance, people of all genders are welcome. When they met this weekend, what they did was welcome the new leaders by sharing the history, which also included this, that there were 2 times that our congregation was on the brink of not existing. And the members of the Alliance used their ingenuity and generosity to help the community pull through. Right there, they modeled for all of us the oscillating narrative, a narrative that helps shape who we are and the possibilities for the future. Although Portland Pride has been moved to July this year, I can't help but recall the grounding, or one of the grounding stories that often places Pride in June. The story of the Stonewall riots, which I've heard so many times, especially from a couple of elders where I am from who were there over 50 years ago. And upon this story is woven a movement for liberation. Stonewall was a dive bar on Christopher Street where the windows were boarded up, where the LGBTQ2S community could dance and drink and be affectionate in the open without worry. I have heard stories from my mother about nights spent there. And although it was generally safe, police would still routinely stop by and make arrests from time to time. On June 28, 1969, when the cops came to make their rounds and they were told to shut the place down because of visitors to the city for the World's Fair and wanting to make, quote unquote, the best presentation possible to tourists, that night, the people at Stonewall said, "This street belongs to drag queens. This street belongs to us." And a wall of resistance and love rose up and said no to cops who were being paid off by the mafia, no to cops who were propping up a system making money on the arrests of poor queer folks, and no to the idea that by simply being, they were doing something illegal. One of the celebrated amongst the resistors was Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman who, according to legend, smashed her shot glass against a window in the Stonewall Inn while the bar was on fire and shouted, "I've got my civil rights." People often talk about that as the shot glass that was heard around the world. And I've read accounts that say that what actually happened was that she was at the top of a lamppost and dropped a brick, shattering the windshield of a police car. Again, the particulars don't matter. It's a story of rising up and of resistance. It is true, Marsha P. Johnson and others that night had enough. They knew that they were holy and worthy and deserved respect and a place to be themselves. They knew that there were better days ahead and that the time to usher them into being was that moment. Justice was not on the side of the police. Justice was theirs to claim and would arrive when the power of resistance overcame the power of corruption. That narrative serves us all the way up to this moment where So many of our family members are threatened around the country with anti-trans legislation, and we must all join the resistance against unjust laws and working to usher in greater freedom now. Tomorrow is another one of our family's stories, of our human family, our United States family stories. It is Juneteenth, and I want to just name into the sanctuary and invite the story to be told to me, perhaps for next year, but Clara Peoples, I understand, helped celebrate the first Juneteenth in Portland as early as 1945. But this is the story of one of the grandmothers of the holiday countrywide, Opal Lee. She was 94 years old when she held Vice President Harris's hand and stood by Biden as he signed Juneteenth into law as a federal holiday. She was in that honored position because at 89 years of age, she marched 1,400 miles from Texas to DC and gained 1.5 million signatures in her efforts to raise awareness of the holiday and to spread it from Texas across the land. She also organized an annual 2.5-mile walk in Fort Worth, representing the 2.5 years Texas slaves waited for their freedom until the Union troops arrived in 1865 to finally enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. She is not alone in her efforts, and yet her persistence and her imagination for something better stands out. It made me curious about the stories she carries. Opal was born in Marshall, Texas, and when her family moved to Fort Worth, her father built a beautiful home. It was located in a white neighborhood, and many neighbors didn't want her family there when they moved in 1939. In fact, on Juneteenth in 1939, 500 people in their city gathered around her house and burned it to the ground. Again, a dozen police officers were present, but none of them did a thing to stop it. No one was arrested. No one made restitution to her family. The local papers didn't even carry the story, but it did appear elsewhere. That fire ignited a passion in Opal for racial injustice and for making the world and our nation specifically a better place for her and for everyone. Imagine staring at that loss, at the embers of her home. Someone else might not want to remember June 19th. But she saw in those embers the possibility of building our nation anew, including how we teach our history and how we move forward to co-create something more whole, more redeeming, more holy. And she became the force of nature who galvanized a nation to reckon with its past and to reckon with its present and to move towards the future. Now, when Opal shares her story with children and adults of all ages, she often begins with this. She has memories of sitting with her granddaddy, Zach, on his wooden porch as he told freedom stories to her as a child, and now she's telling freedom stories to all of us. Zach's told stories about how during slavery, earning and learning was against the law, but he asserted it was slavery who was the thief. And she goes on to tell stories about injustices in her childhood, one of which you heard, and the meaning of Juneteenth as something bigger than Texas and singing and dancing. It is about freedom rising. The story of her life and her family's life is about freedom rising. And now let me be clear, she's been interviewed on this question, and she does not think that things are good right now just because offices are closed tomorrow. She is clear that our nation's present is rife with racism. I hope you paid attention to the Department of Justice's report on what happened in Minneapolis in terms of the treatment of Black residents there, even before George Floyd and continuing. Opal reminds us to be a people who are willing and ready to tell the truth as it is. That's what Freedom Rising means. To find a way to heal from the past and the present, that's what Freedom Rising means. And to contribute to liberating change, that's what a life of Freedom Rising looks like. So let's use this day, Father's Day, or gender non-binary parent and guardian and grandparent and mentor day number 2, to reflect on what is the overarching narrative that we may have inherited, and what is the story that we are passing on to family and to the communities that we care about. Does it allow us to rise and celebrate a glorious day? Does it allow us to rise and lift higher towards a more whole and holy tomorrow as the forces of fascism and the right wing attempt to take flight? Does it remind us that we are enough and worthy? Does it remind us we are not alone, but intertwined with others, moving with grace and grit towards love? If not, then maybe it's time for a new story. May the next chapter that you write and that we write together allow freedom to rise, love to rise, freedom to be grounded and rooted in the truth, love to be grounded and rooted in the truth, and the beloved community to rise from the embers of oppression, and the beloved community to rise all across the land, from Texas to Portland, from this corner to every corner around the globe. May that be the narrative that we move towards. Amen, and may it be so. going. May the light of love as we approach the longest day and the nourishment of darkness bless us and keep us. May they fill us up and allow us to radiate the balance of both in the world. For this is the day that you and I are given. So let us rejoice in it and be glad. Go in peace, practice love. Amen.